Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Dyer, and you're listening to a reading of The All Guardsman Party by Shaggy. Link to the full story will be in the description. I hope you enjoy. And as always, stay alive out there. Semi-rogue, semi-inquisitor Greg Sargent sighed and looked around for something to throw at the damn screaming servo-skull. The immediate area had been depleted of disposable munitions, but a grope under the table found a grimy yellow sticky note declaring, "Do not remove this note." Sarge shrugged, wadded the note into a ball, and hucked it at the noisy servo-skull, or to be more precise, the undeniably insane Magos biologist who'd somehow managed to install his brain in the thing. The sticky note fared no better than Sarge's previous projectiles, sizzling to ash midair as one of the skull's little mechadendrites zapped it and failed to disrupt Magos' Smith's screaming rant on the nature of Xenos astropathic communications. Sarge got a bit more of a response from the rest of the little war council, ranging from a small snort from the cheerfully stoic Rupert, a disapproving eyebrow from Alfred, and a proffered laser pistol from the captain. The cogitator adept, the only person in the room actually listening to the Magos, shot Sarge a half-annoyed, half-apologetic look and made a shooing expression at the nominal superior. Sarge shrugged, muttered a hasty, "Meeting adjourned," and headed for the exit before anyone else could come up with something for him to work on. To say the debriefing had run long was an understatement. Without the old diplomacy adept to run things, getting the Magos to shut up was nigh impossible. Sarge would have given anything for the wily little geezer to return from wherever Oak had sent him, sock puppets and all, if only to have someone to relieve him in these Emperor-damned meetings. Amy had wisely fled at the 4-hour mark, pleading a homicidal rage, but Sarge was pretty sure that as the person in charge of the meeting, he was supposed to stay until it officially ended. Warily wondering who he was even trying to impress, Sarge opened the briefing room door, took a step, and collapsed in a heap as someone jabbed a syringe into his neck. When Sarge woke up, he was naked, strapped face down to a table with the highly alarming whine of a power saw coming from somewhere above him. Reacting with the berserk strength of someone who still had a majority of his limbs and wanted to keep them, the non-com torqued his entire body against the restraints, the straps having been designed exactly for this sort of thing, held tight, as did the vice clamped around his left wrist. Less so, the table they were all fastened to. Several people cursed as the table's upper half snapped free of the lower, and the entire assembly bucked into the air before crashing over sideways in a jumbled heap. Sarge had his unviced hand free now, if not the whole arm, and rooted around in the junk on the floor for something sharp to cut his straps. His fingers touched on some sort of handle, only to have it kicked out of his grip by a booted foot, so Sarge grabbed the boot instead and yanked it with all his strength available to him. The boot's owner gave a surprised yelp as they face-planted directly on top of Sarge. The non-com strained against the head strap, managing to get his face turned enough to get a blurry image of his attacker out of the corner of his eye until someone punched him in it. A single punch wasn't usually enough to put down Sarge, at least not one from anything smaller than an Ogren. Before he could continue his escape, the fight abruptly drained out of him. He closed his eyes to the sound of an exasperated argument over whose fault all of that had been, and quietly hoped that it wasn't his. Sarge's next awakening was accompanied by a lot of swearing, which was normal, but the source of the profanity was external for a change. He blinked as a goggled face wavered above him, drifting back and forth drunkenly. Attempting to bring the wavering figure into focus somehow only made the effect worse. Sarge attempted to bat the nauseating figure away, giving the entire bed a good shake, but failing to part the thick leather straps, tying him to it. Tink reached a steadying arm down to Sarge, arresting the bobbing movement of his grav crutches, and hushed the groggy non-com. "Shh, we're breaking you out of here," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder before setting to work on Sarge's restraints. "We have 10 minutes until Valerie gets back. We gotta move." Sarge sat up, pushing Tink off of him, sending the techie in a surprisingly long arc across the room. Tink swore and fought the controls on his grav chute, barely avoiding a collision with a light fixture and whining about how Sarge was going to spoil their stealthy getaway. Taking stock and finding a majority of his appendages were left were where he'd left them, Sarge pondered the sticky note adhered to his wrist reading, IOU, one hand, Hannah. This was reassuring, as the cog girl was generally good about paying off her markers, and a lot less likely to hawk the Arbite's great augmetic for booze money than anyone else aboard. A second note stuck upside down on his chest, readability prescribed 3 drink, maximum 1 minimum, no spicy foods, with Sister Valerie's illegible signature underneath. Sarge nodded vaguely, declining to argue with Tink's whole prison break narrative, and followed the hovering techie out of the medbay. Interlude Debrief. They were joined at the medbay's exit by Theo, dutifully performing his role as Tink's lookout from just beyond the medbay's "No Xenos Allowed" sign. Sarge ignored the pair of techies as they chattered incomprehensibly, mostly about Tink's techno-heretical crutches. As they neared the barracks, Sarge was gratified to see the perimeter in good order, if not littered with considerably more servitor bits than he'd remembered. Inside, the non-com was finally able to shed his annoying escort, Tink and Theo scurrying off to the section they'd claimed as a laboratory. Sarge idly noticed that this section had grown markedly, nearly impeding on Twitch's munition dump, where the demo trooper had appeared to be holding some sort of class with the former trainees. The only other member of the squad present was Amy. The markswoman was sitting in front of Hannah, who at first glance appeared to be giving her a haircut. This theory failed to explain the mechanical contraption rolling around the floor, though, as well as the cable running from Amy's head and the general lack of scissors. Amy waved at Sarge, and down on the floor the small tank-like machine waved a claw in his direction. "Welcome back to the land of the living, fearless leader. How is your shotness of your ass?" Behind her, Hannah snickered. Sarge ignored the inquiry, aside from giving the region in question an exploratory scratch, and gestured at the mysterious device. "What is that, and why is it wearing cat ears?" Amy grinned. "It's a cat!" Sarge nodded, as if this explained anything at all, and looked at Hannah instead. The cog girl gestured a mechadendrite at an invitingly empty chair next to them. "We are re-sanctifying her mind impulse unit, and since I couldn't find a bane blade to calibrate it with, we're using my cat. Now sit down. Once we're done, we'll get started on your hand." From this corner, Tink raised his voice. "So you're saying you'll give Sarge his hand job once Amy is done playing with your—" The techie broke off as all 3 members of the conversation turned to glare at him, and exercising his one functional social grace, shut his mouth and turned back to Theo. Sarge settled into the proffered seat with a weary sigh of a very busy man with a valid, if temporary, excuse not to be. Dropping him from their attention, Amy and Hannah resumed what, if they hadn't been a guardswoman and a tech priestess, would have been defined as gossiping. The main topic seemed to be all the horrendous things that Magos Smith had been up to, from the ongoing squig infestation to turning most of the lower decks into his personal manufactorum. After he took over a Faraday clubhouse, gossiped Hannah, this was the only place left on the ship secure from the madman, at least once he ran out of the diffuser servitors. Amy nodded. "Just don't let Twitch know that, or he'll—" From the back of the room there was a shout of, "Too late!" followed by a maniacal laughter. The cog girl shrugged. The discussion turned to Hannah's new cadre of recruits who'd settled in surprisingly well given the circumstances of their recruitment, with their senior tech priest somehow winding up working in hydroponics with the tribals. Despite Sarge's best efforts, he felt himself beginning to nod off, at least until the breaching charge went off. Acting on pure instinct, Sarge launched himself upwards. Unfortunately, those instincts had a rather out-of-date theory about the number of hands in his possession. Not having been designed to support 100+ kilos of non-com on one arm, the chair flipped over, taking the non-com with it. From this newfound position on the floor, Sarge listened to the sound of flash grenades and las fire coming from somewhere behind him. Reassured by the steady firing cadence of a squad picking their targets and general lack of screaming, he relaxed and decided that his current position was actually quite comfortable. Unfortunately, while comfortable, the position was not secure and immediately fell under attack. Somewhere above him, Amy and Hannah giggled as the cat rolled forward, prodding at him with its claw. With a put-upon groan, Sarge abandoned his position to the enemy's overwhelming assault and levered himself upright with the existing hand this time. Ignoring the muffled snickering behind him, he stumped off to survey the literal battle damage at the rear of the bay. The breach in the wall had been done cleanly enough, with clear signs of having been pre-cut, not going through any power conduits or sewage pipes. Sarge skirted around the blast shields that had been erected around the breach and looked inside as the last of the las fire trailed off. In the middle of the flare-lit bay, Twitch was triumphantly holding up a leaking purple ball of teeth and quills and loudly declaring it to be a scroot, not to be confused with a Kruig. The 4 flak-armored men around him nodded attentively, and as Sarge, the non-com's hindbrain, automatically examined their kit, posture, and weapon discipline, he allowed himself a bit of sergeantly pride in the newly found Team Rupert. The floor around the little group was littered with a combination of scroot bits, shredded packing material, and a worryingly large number of human skulls. Sarge picked his way across the floor, inspecting the nest-like detritus, but was relieved to discover almost all of the skulls to be old, clean, and wired with bits of electric junk. Twitch explained to his captive audience that the critters had probably been living on the servo skulls everyone kept sending to spy on us. Sarge cleared his throat, and the squad came to a gratifyingly swift attention. "Barracks," grunted Sarge. Twitch nodded smartly. "Carry on." His duty done, Sarge turned his back on the proudly straight-faced and headed towards the comfortable chair. As he drew close, Amy waved a hand and cheerfully explained, "Nubby sent them to Alfred 'cause he always know where's to find the biggest digs." And Alfred sent them back with a very polite note about us being the hosts here and doing our fracking jobs. Hannah paused and looked at Sarge too. "Was it Scroots or Kurigs?" "Scroots." Hannah swore and tossed Munitorum-flavored fructose bar to Amy, who accepted it with good grace of someone getting their brain augmetics poked at. The cog girl explained Tech Priest Lagbolt sealed it for inspection when he found a bunch of nubby stuff in there, she grinned, before he got demoted to junior engineer 7th grade. Hannah poked something on the data slate, and the floor of the cat's turrets started to rotate spasmodically. "We tried to send some skulls in to get the interior override, but the Crutoids got there first, so after the 3rd we just decided to leave it be." Sarge raised an eyebrow. "Lot more than 3 in there." Hannah nodded. "Probably all the skulls sent to spy on you. Didn't Twitch tell you about them?" Amy smirked at Sarge's look of disgust and munched her fructose bar while the cat waved its turret claw in a series of increasingly obscene gestures. Sarge's hand was somewhere between the on-fire and the reflexively death-clenching stages of augmetic reconnection when the supply convoy arrived, announcing their presence via a psychic shout for anyone who wanted dinner to deactivate the perimeter mines and carry some shit. Fumbles and Nubby carefully brought their grocery pallet through the front kill box. The hall seemed to be a good one, with actual food-like smells coming from some of the boxes, and the aggressively bland labeling of Munitorum alcohol rations on some of the others. Sarge began to rise with the vague goal of asserting some semblance of order on the unloading process and asking Fumbles where Nubby had gotten it all, only to be yanked back into his seat by a mechadendrite around his arm. Hannah growled something in binary, and Sarge flinched as another nerve connection snapped into existence. He decided that he would stay seated. Doc arrived as the chow was being laid out, unexpectedly accompanied by Chief Medicae sister-girlfriend Valerie, who viewed the barracks as something just short of a neural cult lair. Equally unexpected was the cogitator adept, who held similar views, particularly regarding Twitch and his idea of security, which was probably why Jim was carrying him. Interrogator Alfred's presence bringing up the rear, calmly chatting with the near-hysterical adept, and carrying a stack of kit bags and data slates taller than he was, seemed as perfectly normal and unexceptional as he always did. Team Rupert's surprise at their newly issued, perfectly fitting, evil inquisitorial goon uniforms was amusing, as was Alfred's recollection of all of us receiving ours and Nubby's third-hand account of what happened to Sarge's uniform. A sort of ad hoc banquet formed around the table where most of the food-like boxes had been deposited, drawing Tink and Theo away from their project, and Twitch away from duct-taping every wall seam in the scroot bay. Tink flinched at the sight of Sister Valerie bobbing over to urge Sarge to hide before she noticed him, earning the techie an eye roll and a tart comment about having literally left a note with a drink limit stuck to Sarge's chest. Twitch pried open the first crate of Munitorum liquor, revealing the finest of Nuskin fungus wine. The second crate at least didn't list its ingredients and vaguely identified itself as beer-ish and was breaded up to first crates, despite Alfred's insistence that it was actually a very commendable vintage. Sarge freed himself from Hannah's clutches, his augmetic feeling almost as normal as constantly wearing a power fist, and tried to guess whether any of the other ration crates would have something more drinkable in them. It was Nubby who raised the topic of Oak, whining about how the Inquisitor had absolutely no sense of gratitude. If this dumb boxy thing was so important, why'd he go and send us off with bloody Bane? What's it, trying to kill us? This was a well-worn topic, at least the Oak is trying to kill us part, but for once it was immediately followed by Twitch's knee-jerk, yes! Interrogator Alfred cleared his throat, and when that didn't work, set out little psychic nudge, earning him several dirty looks, and a whispered, no psychic powers at the table, from Fumbles, but it did at least get everyone's attention. Alfred sat down his glass of fungus wine. I believe that he may simply have forgotten, you see. Whatever response Alfred expected, it wasn't Nubby to cut in and declare, nah, we fought of that. But the Inquisitor as one of them I edit memory brain augmetic thingies like a cogboy or a cogitator weenie. He gestured at Hannah and the Adept. And that means he don't forget nothing. Unless, interjected Twitch in a surge of manic excitement, he forgot it on purpose. There was the usual chorus of groans from around the table, but the demo trooper ignored them. No, shut up, this makes perfect sense. How do you hide secrets from a bunch of psychers who can read them and read their thoughts out of your brain? You delete them from your own mind. He paused, hyperventilating. It's genius, absolute genius, and explains everything. There was a collective pause as everyone mulled this over, until Amy broke it. That's the stupidest idea I've ever... Alfred raised a polite finger. Actually... God, Emperor, fucking damn it. The markswoman slouched in her seat, muttering to herself about the unfairness of the universe. Alfred sighed, the sigh of someone whose big surprise had just been spoiled by a smelly idiot, and asked, First, where exactly did you hear that, Corporal Nubbs? Nubby, sensing danger, immediately threw his comrades under the bus. Tink and Theo said it. At the far end of the table, Theo looked in vague confusion until Tink whispered something to him. The little xenoscientist nodded. Mago the Fleshsmith screamed he would fill me in once I penetrated his perimeter. Taking in the confused look this statement earned, he expanded, It was a very flattering offer, the design being the device by himself and made with brain matter cloned from the most adequately intelligent of Inquisitors. Alfred sighed again and picked his wine back up. I would like to ask everyone present to mediate on the effectiveness of a secret anti-psyker memory alter if it stops being secret, and kindly keep their mouths firmly shut. I had my own suspicions after Inquisitor Copernicus assigned both you and the Madman as our backup, it being such a deliberately terrible fit, but I'd assumed it was some traitorous underling. Alfred's unobtrusive demeanor began to drop away as the man grew and engaged in his story. But it was one of my rare encounters with Copernicus that it occurred to me that his mind was not just exceptionally open to psychic reading, it was deliberately that way. Even as a minor as a psyker as myself could sense the plain truth of his words, even when speaking of things I personally knew to secretly be false. Fumbles nodded in confirmation. I could hear him from 3 rooms away. It was super weird, like he was constantly talking to himself, explaining what he was currently doing, even when he was doing something completely different. It was very hard to talk to him. Alfred hushed the young psyker with a gesture and continued. I had asked a casual question about the gene seeds recovered in our mission to that uncivilized backwater, and realized the Inquisitor's version of events perfectly matched that in our reports. The point being that we'd reported only half the number of untainted gene seeds, omitting multiple batches from our inventory as his express direction. Either the man was the greatest liar I'd ever encountered, or he really did believe that we hadn't found any ultramarine-descended seeds in the hall. Alfred sighed again. I was going to explain the whole process of deducing the existence of his augmetic memory alterations, but apparently that's not necessary. Across the table, Theo worriedly asked Tink if he'd done something wrong. But Alfred waved forgivingly at the little Xenos and turned to Twitch. In essence, yes. Twitch, Inquisitor Copernicus, secretly edits his own memories as an anti-psyker security measure. The demolitions trooper puffed up with a vindicated paranoia, but remained silent as Sarge leaned over and rested his heavy augmetic on his shoulder. Alfred nodded in appreciation. I believe the Inquisitor reserves this technique for matters dealing with the conspiracy, keeping himself on a need-to-know basis. Amy broke in with a sneer. At least he doesn't ask his troops to do anything he wouldn't do himself, scoring a few chuckles and a disapproving look from Alfred. Alfred continued, and putting his great trust in his allies' and subordinates' abilities to implement his plans. Nubby raised a hand. Alfred sighed in anticipation. So, when ye need someone super dependable and trustworthy for his secret mission thing, he picked us? Alfred nodded gravely. Yes. Why in the Emperor's name would he do that? Presumably all the better options were busy or very dead. It was one of Team Rupert who raised the question of just what the Necron QB thing was, and if it had come off the same Necron scout vessel that had killed 75% of their graduating class. It was hard to say whether it was Matt, Max, Mac, or Mark that asked. Only Twitch seemed to be able to keep track, and since they all called each other by their former careers, just like we did, it didn't particularly matter. In any case, the scribe's question led to more questions, and our genuine surprise, it was our former trainees regaling the table with dubiously accurate recollections. When the story got to Cutter's last stand, Doc was both surprised and embarrassed as Sister Valerie slightly drunkenly gushed over how he had killed 2 traitor Astartes, obviously viewing his administration of combat stims to the wounded as perfectly in line with the Imperial medical practices. Nubby seized the opportunity to take the spotlight, and that's when I personally recovered that fancy Archaeotech box thingy with the nutty cogboy was trying to take, saving it from imminent orbital bombardment and dutifully turning it over to Inquisitor thankless bastard. Tink, who'd stayed remarkably quiet through the whole thing, looked from Nubby to the rest of the squad with his mouth hanging open. You had a Tesseract labyrinth, and you gave it away! Nubby glared back. It wasn't like the Inquisitor gave us a choice or nothing. He paused to scratch thoughtfully at a boil before continuing. Nor the Interrogator, for that matter. Packed up us on the first ship back to Oaken the second we saw it. Twitch nodded in affirmation. Told us we'd all be killed in horrifically painful ways if we discussed it with anybody. Wait, asked Amy. Oak or the Interrogator? And which one was this anyway? The one that got arrested or the Sysattack guy? Both, answered Sarge before anyone could. And it wasn't either of those assholes, it was, There was a pause while the non-com tried to recall an actual name before giving up with a shrug. The one with the data slate? Surprisingly, almost everyone present nodded in understanding. The notable exception was the cogitator adept, who stared in disbelief. You do realize that Interrogator Olmus is the Inquisitor's actual interrogator, as in he answers directly to Inquisitor Copernicus? This revelation was met with several blank looks, and Tink pointed across the table. Yeah, so Sarge at least until Ivana tricked him into being an Inquisitor, and... The adept worked his jaw, presumably attempting to come up with an answer that didn't involve calling everyone present incidents. Fortunately, Alfred came to the rescue. As in, he's the Inquisitor's executive officer, while Sarge was just part of the command squad. This gloss was met with general approval. Amy, who'd recently spent several weeks traveling with both Oak and the Interrogator, asked the obvious question. The hell was he doing babysitting you idiots on a training detail? Mostly playing with his data slate, supplied Doc. I meant aside from that. One of Team Rupert raised a hand. Getting a bunch of us killed by Necrons? Exactly, interrupted Twitch. Oak wanted a Necron box, right? And his XO just so happens to be personally send us to a planet where one just randomly shows up. It all fits! Everyone looked to Alfred, who nodded in reluctant support. There was a series of groans around the table as Twitch pumped up his fist in the air and started rapidly expounding on how Oak had obviously been manipulating our missions to an agenda so secret not even he himself knew it. Before this digression into Oak's theoretical plots could pick up too much steam, Nubby cut Twitch off. What I wants to know was what's so special about this Tessa thingy anyway. Tink leaned forward in excitement, drifting slightly over the table until Theo helpfully pulled him back. It's a xeno-archaeotech device containing a sealed pocket dimension capable of holding, well, anything. Nubby's expression perked up in interest. We talking about tonnage-wise? Because I know this guy that does some off-the-books shipping who'd... Sarge gave Nubby a medium-strength glare, which the grubby trooper deciphered easily. I means, if we hadn't already turned it over with the proper authorities, I mean. Alfred cleared his throat. Actually, you didn't. The proper authorities in this case would have been the Ordos Malleus, as these devices are only known way to permanently containing a demonic entity. They'd know the secrets of their use. Theo looked at Alfred quizzically. Really? It did not seem to covertly difficult to disentangle. The table fell silent, and Alfred gave the Xenos a pained look as he poured himself another glass of fungus wine. I suppose the Magos told you about that too. Theo nodded, then caught himself and shook his head. No, the Fleshsmith had me designate the interface myself. He was over-encumbered instilling the Xeno Psycho Seance Inducer and the hexadecimal containment words in the skull boxes. This time everyone looked at the short Tau xenotechnological genius, with the exception of Jim and Hannah, who started a burst of something in binary. Theo took it in those carefully looks cheerfully. Does that mean I am of the Ordo Malleus now? No, replied everyone. Theo's rambling explanation of what he and the Magos had done to the boxes to turn them into some sort of demon trap was almost impossible to follow. The bit about activating the Tesseract with some sort of Imperial Tau hybrid field thingy was simple enough, if only because we'd seen that Necron ship he'd worked on and were willing to take his word for it. Even Theo found the whole concept of psychotechnology tricky, though, and it was hard to say if the drinking was helping or not. As Tink finally put it, so how it works is the skulls are like former Inquisitors who've been possessed by the demon. I prefer extra-dimensional psycho-energy entity, added Theo unhelpfully. Tink ignored him. And because it possessed them, it still knows its unique phonetic signature, creating a multi-directional psychic correction between them and the... Tink hushed the Xenos. Name. The Deaders know the demon's name, so Magos Screamy Skull put together some sort of Wraithbone circuit board thingy to automatically trigger a sort of seance thingy. He paused, looking back to Theo, which summoned the Dezed Inquisitor's ghost, semi-sentient warp echo, ghost, which turns the demon's name to summon it into the psychoplanar pocket realm. Ghost Dream. The ghost summons the demons into the Ghost Dream and traps it there. Then the other boxes summon the first box. Actually, it's the entity itself and they just eat each other until it's demon in a box and box in a box because it's too strong for just that one of them to hold it. Doc raised a polite hand. But all three together will be enough to hold it? Tink shrugged and looked to Theo. Yes, for multiple hours. The Mago told me. Tink nodded sagely. Yeah, so probably important to get the Tesseract back before Oak tries to use it. As Tink wound down, Sarge put down the last of his prescribed beverages and assumed the briefing pose. And that, Guardsman, is why we're on our way back to Inquisitorial headquarters. Tink, Twitch, Doc, and Nubby, and everyone who had been spared the ordeal for the debriefing started swearing. Sarge correctly interpreted this as general inquiry into the strategic situation. First, shut up. Second, roughly 6 hours after we departed the system, Oak warped his battleship into the system and surrendered himself to Inquisitorial authority. Doc raised a hand and asked the inevitable question. Why in the Emperor's name would he do that? Dunno. Maybe he expects the demon to come to his trial or something. Sarge shrugged. In any case, we need to get back there before those boxes are brought in as evidence or shit's gonna go sideways. Hard. How hard? Alfred raised a finger. If I may, Inquisitor. The interrogator took up a pose of his own, standing before the table, gesturing at the detritus of food boxes and empty bottles, as if it was a hololithic tack map. Currently, 3/4 of the Inquisitorial fleet have been dispatched to counter the sudden inexplicable appearance of a Tyrannid's splinter feet in the region, and won't be returning until their navigators recover from the psychic shock that the unholy abomination the Magos is keeping up in the astropathic sanctum. The Magos calls it a xenophantasmal warp jammer, explained Theo. We calls it a demonthrope, added Nubby, or Frank. After a silenced commentary with look delightful, in addition to its use as a psychic weapon and masquerading as a Tyrannid fleet, the Magos assures us that the abomination's warp shadow will block all astropathic communication, cutting off Inquisitorial headquarters from any reinforcements. And, added Fumbles with a glance up through the ceiling at something nobody else would see, given anyone over Delta sensitivity one hell of a headache until they get used to it. Alfred nodded to his fellow psyker and continued. Of the remaining Inquisitorial fleet assets, several have yet to return from a mission to Harlock's Wager, and most of the remainder are tied up picketing our Inquisitor Copernicus's battleship and its attendant vessels. This leaves the Astra Militarum task force being mustered to counter the non-existent Tyrannids as the primary power in the system, with Lady Amelia's mother commanding. Amy groaned at both the title and the overall situation and hid her face in her arms. Alfred ignored her. Between them, a Mechanicus task force, 6 Deathwatch destroyers, and strike cruisers from the Lamenters and Grey Knight chapters, the conspiracy's void assets are heavily outnumbered. Sarge nodded. And, analog with all that, Amy's mom has 9 regiments of guards all ready to drop on Inquisitorial HQ and purge some gene stealers, assuming Oak can smoke them out. The table fell silent, pondering the sheer scale of the Charlie Foxtrot looming before them. After several seconds, Doc asked the question. And if he can't? Sarge attempted to do the whole look around the table and meet everyone's eyes to establish the seriousness of the situation routine, but gave it up as a waste of effort before he even made it to Nubby. Instead, the tired non-com flopped back into his seat, stared dolefully at Sister Valerie until the Medicaid pityingly held up a single finger and Doc passed him a final drink. And if he can't, we're so fracked, we might as well go back to the Penal Legion. Sarge paused, cautiously sniffed the Munitorum issue beverage before raising it in toast. So here's to the Inquisitor, and pray to the Emperor he's better at this shit than we are. Next time, the trial of Inquisitor Copernicus. Stay tuned. And as always, stay alive out there.